Hi everybody, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple, a board game review show where I deal with reviews, top 10s, and always give my honest, humble opinion, even if a lot of people might not necessarily agree with it. So today I'm looking at Tainted Grail, the Kings of Ruin prototype. So this is a preview as opposed to a review, although, as with all my preview videos, I will give my honest thoughts about how I think this game is shaping up at the moment. But of course, this is due to launch on Kickstarter next week. I'll put the date in the description. And of course, you know, things can change, you know, production changes, components change, rules change. So, you know, what I'm saying now is as of playing the prototype. So it's no secret, as a little background, that I do love Tainted Grail. The original one is down on my shelf downstairs. I have the entire all-in pledge for the previous one. So I got Tainted Grail, I've got the, what was it called? The Last Night future, like set in the future Winter Wasteland campaign. I literally a few weeks ago just finished the Age of Legends prequel campaign that was in the box, and I have not done Red Death, and I'm not even sure I will ever. Not because I don't like it, but it's just the game is pretty hard. I'm not sure I want to play the expert campaign and get my, get my rear end handed to me, but I really love the narrative storyline of this. With Tainted Grail, I like a good dark, gritty tale. I don't want like happy-go-lucky Zelda-style story narrative telling for the most part. There are some exceptions. But with these, if we're going to go into like magic and sort of medieval stuff and that, I want it to be gritty, dark, you know, like, give me like a, not necessarily make me uncomfortable, but I want things to be like, not pleasant. You know, it's not just like, oh, everything's happy hunky-dory. It's like, nah, you're surviving. The world's kind of gone to pot and you're trying to do the best you can and not everybody is out to give you a helping hand. You know, that kind of setting I really enjoy. You're sick! So the general plot of Kings of Ruin is essentially this is set a little bit ahead of the events of Tainted Grail, but I don't think it's quite as far as, you know, the future, the Last Night where everything was all Winter Wasteland. But the idea is that you play two characters who have journeyed to do your various trade. Like someone went hunting, you went to go sell candles. And as you got to a place called Four Maidens, the weirdness sort of built up, it got misty, the King's Pass like track that you were trying to get through is now blocked off, and you're just trying to get home. You know, you're not trying to solve the riddle of the mystic arts or something, you're just trying to get back to your family or back to your tribe or whatever. So the story commences with you setting off and encountering stuff that obviously changes your destiny. The whole idea with the Kings of Ruin title is that there were basically three like heroes that sprung up over time that tried to go find King Arthur because he's already like long gone. But what happened is that these three heroes went out and effectively became Kings of Ruin as they were named, where they were twisted, they were sort of mutated, and basically it didn't go well for them, shall we say. So the idea being that these three Kings of Ruin exist. Where are they? You don't know. You're not going out to find them, but Destiny has a way of making them find you whether you like it or not. So Kings of Ruin is a standalone campaign expansion for the game. So what that means is that you don't need to own any of the original Tainted Grail in order to play this. You might think, you know what, I'm just going to jump straight into this version and ignore the original one. Do I think you should? That's really down to you. I mean, this is going to make references to, you know, people and ideas and things from the sort of Tainted Grail universe that you might not necessarily understand if you haven't played the first lot, but still, you do not have to. If you don't want to spend so much money, you know, with the first lot, then you can just jump into this, and I think the story explains it perfectly well. You know what's going on, you know what the weirdness is, as you might pronounce it, you know that everything's kind of gone to pot, and it will tell you who King Arthur and all these various people are, so you do not need to have that background. It's just a nice bonus if you do. So what this is a 10-chapter campaign. The original was 15, so I'm glad they've shortened it a little bit, just to make it a little bit less daunting in terms of getting it done. But you play through each chapter, and each chapter is pretty lengthy. I mean, these two chapters that I got in this prototype box were long, to say the least. I thought I was going to be able to get this done reasonably quick and then get this preview done. No, it took me a while to get through these playing two-handed. It really, you get plenty of story and plenty of stuff to do in these scenarios, so it's not like 10 minutes and you're done. No, you're going to be playing each chapter for a good few hours before you get it done. But in each chapter, you progress through the story, you'll encounter side NPCs, story elements, continue with your personal story, and, fight monsters, engage in diplomatic encounters, and you essentially progress through the story as told by an exploration journal. So all these locations that you can go to, and sort of like, slight spoiler alert, I'm not going to spoil too much in terms of plot, but you're going to see mechanics, you're going to see artwork. Deal with it. I mean, otherwise, why would you be watching this? But you essentially have these cards on the board. They represent locations, and these locations will be, next door to each other, but they are two-sided. So they're flipped with the clear side, which essentially is, oh yeah, everything's nice. But then there's also a weirdness side, which is basically like everything's all misty, cloudy, and it's, I think the best way to describe the weirdness is evil fog that sends you insane and has nasty gribblies in it. It's kind of something you might almost expect from a Cthulhian type storyline. But your characters will be on the location cards. You'll move them around by spending action points, of which you have a certain allowance based on your character board. And as you go to these locations, you'll explore them, which involves going to a journal and reading from the various passages as directed, and this will progress the story and give you side encounters and have you gain keywords which you tick off a save sheet that means that when you encounter someone else later on, it will say, do you have false rumors part 2 or something? If so, read this verse, and you just carry on in that simplistic manner. Now, compared to the first one, the story, yeah, it's great. I mean, the first Tainted Grail had a fantastic story, and that was one of my favourite things about it, the gritty storyline. I mean, this was really good quality writing, really good setting, great world building. This is no different. I mean, I went through the first scenario and I was already hooked into the story. It's like, and even more so, I think, than the original, because one minor flaw with the original is that the characters you had felt very kind of similar in a sense, like story-wise, but you didn't feel too differentiated with them, and there were some kind of obscure ones. Here though, I think they've kind of like improved it on some respect. You get to play in this prototype. There's going to be 4 characters, I only had 2. Elgin the Candlemaker and Gerdwin the Sellsword, or I basically call her a huntress because she's got a giant crossbow. But these two felt very different from each other, not just in the way I wanted to operate them. I mean, Gerdwin blatantly was kind of like a combat fighter-ish character, and Elgin is blatantly slightly better at the whole diplomacy thing. But normally I used to play this game solo. I'm now getting more into that mindset of playing two-handed, for a couple of reasons. We'll get onto that later. But I played both, and I felt that they were very distinct. Each character essentially has their own combat and diplomacy deck, much like the original Tainted Grail. But with these cards, in the original they kind of just felt very generic attacks, with some exceptions, depending on the character. Here though, it felt much more specific to who you were playing. Like, for example, Gerdwin runs around with a crossbow. So some of her cards are just defend, intimidate, charge, like you would expect. But then there's ones like Silver Bolt and Hunting Bolt and Poison Bolt and stuff like that. It's like, okay. And you can even get cards that are basically like improved crossbow in that. So it felt more akin to what her deck was. On Elgin's side, same thing. You get to make candles. So you've got Ancient Candle, Poison Candle, Candlestick Smash. He wanders around with this great big like staff with a candle coming out of it. It's like really cool. But the idea that you actually are playing cards that fit with what your character is just makes it more appealing from a thematic standpoint. I mean, mechanically it's the same thing, but it's nice that it's not just simply attack, block, defend. It's nice that it relates to the character and makes you more immersed and attached to said character. As before, you get skill cards if you level them up, and instead of having a card, you've now got a tile with a cube slot in it that you basically slot next to the skill in question, and it does the job for you. So, all well and good there. But yeah, I mean, these two characters felt really good. Their benefits were very useful benefits, but I didn't feel that their negatives were so debilitating either. Especially in the Age of Legends campaign. I mean, some of the negative effects your characters had were just crippling. It's nice that these are more of a annoyance rather than, oh my god, they hurt every 5 seconds, when I'm with these people. Now, models, Awakened Realms, yeah, we know what Awakened Realms are like, models, and they still look gorgeous. I mean, I've got a few Sundrop samples here. Now, there were some casualties, because they were basically encased in bubble wrap sellotape, so they were damaged in transit, which is why my Gerdwin is basically just a plank of wood. because the actual character fell off. But, you know, when they send you the fulfilled Kickstarter, it will be packaged better.
I feel like I'm gonna break this damn thing.
We all know about this dude. Chlordine. Yeah, this is a brilliant looking model. I mean, I don't care about the scale size or anything that people were moaning about. This is a guy encased in plate armor with a massive cloak on a chariot being pulled by 2 barded horses. I mean, that is just phenomenal as a model. And instead of menhirs that you had before, you now have waystones. And this segues nicely into one of the next really cool things I want to mention about this new set. They are upgrading the first Tainted Grail to what is essentially 2.0. So you can get an upgrade pack if you've already got the original, or if you just buy Tainted Grail now, it'll have those implementations in. The idea is that it's introducing quality of life improvements to make the game a little bit easier, a bit less grindy, because as much as I love the original Tainted Grail, it wasn't perfect. It was very grindy. I had to house rule a lot of it in order to make it more bearable, to make it more, you know, streamlined, also just to make it like easier to play, because I played it solo with just 1 character, and when you played solo in the original Tainted Grail, you were just asking to get whipped in everything. It made it very hard difficulty-wise. Now, one of the big contenders for that was the menhirs. You had to put them on locations in order to open up the map. They were very, like, you know, grindy. You needed to get a ton of resources to activate them. They ticked down as a little timer before they ran out. They were a bit of a pain, so a lot of people house ruled them. Now you have waystones. These are much better. Yes, you still have to put them out in order to like go around the map, but they now go on corners of the map, so they open up more locations like that you are visiting, but they don't cost as many resources to put up. And if you don't have the resources, you can instead do what's basically a blood price sacrifice, which is where you contribute your health to getting them up. Now granted, that hurts, you don't want to do that far too often, but it's great that if you think, oh, I'm 1 magic short from getting this one up, and do I have to go grind some magic? No, you know what, I got some spare health, and then I get one of these up. It can be a lifesaver, trust me on this, because I ended up in that situation, but far less grindy, much better. They don't tick down, so once they're on the board, you either drain them yourself, or like very rarely does a game effect drain the waystone. And I think this is where the Guardians come in. These monsters that roam around the place, no longer are they automatic encounters, which used to do my head in. It's a case that you just can't explore the location while the Guardian is there, and you have to manually challenge it. Much better, because I hated the fact that they were basically auto encounters and rock hard. These Guardians are now killable. In fact, to be honest, I dare say you actually have to kill them in this one if you want to progress further in the act, because they just get in your way otherwise. But it's just a nice, better way of doing it. So other like quality of life improvements I've noticed, the food requirement. You used to have to eat every day. You had to find a food, and it healed you and reduced your terror rating, but you had to keep finding food. Again, grinding. You get where I'm going with this. Here now, if you want to heal, you have to eat food, but you don't have to eat food. At the end of the day, you can just simply say, I'm not eating food. You don't heal, but no other debilitating effects. It's like, instead of eating a nice cooked meal or rations, you're just foraging for berries in the bushes or something.
And small fries.
Lure?
Oh, all right, cottage cheese.
It makes thematic sense, and it's, again, less grindy. I can get a bunch of food and decide when and where I need it. You know, am I at max health already? You know what, I don't really need to eat any food then. It's like, ugh, took a bit of a hit from hunting that deer a second ago. You know what? You know, I'll just eat a bit of food now. These little improvements, they sound minor, but they go a long way. So a lot of the rest of this expansion is kind of as it was before, in the sense that you can upgrade your cards and your diplomacy and your combat deck. Oops, sorry, Chlordine.
How dare you! Open his head!
But you also have like secret cards that you get during the game. So a story art might say, right, get a secret, get it, and it has some cool effect. You can get items. They're now separated into item decks A and B. I don't know if that's going to happen in the main game. It might have just been for the prototype. And of course, you've got the quest cards that tell you what to do, and encounter cards with all the various monsters. And they're all rubber banded at the moment because, let's face it, the images should give you enough information. But you know, all of that stuff kind of remains the same, and I do wish that maybe they tweaked a couple of aspects. You know, the main one is that the items a lot of the time don't feel that great. I want an item that's really cool, that really does a lot for me, and a lot of these items you kind of feel, well, that's kind of meh. I wanted them just to be a little bit more powerful and a little bit more useful. But on top of that, the other thing I wanted to mention is these random events. When you go through the chapters, you have the main quest cards, and you sometimes have to put these random events on top of the deck because it's basically a timer, but they're weather effects. So good weather, you get to travel easier, but most of the time they're bad. And it could be that you immediately find a blue encounter, a green encounter, you lose health when you travel, traveling costs more. There's more bad in here than good, and I just think they're just a bit too punishing. You know, I mean, if you shuffle them up and deal like 3 or 4 at random, and you just happen to deal out all bad events, you've just made your chapter so much harder than if you got lucky and dealt out a bunch of good ones. I get that it's thematic to have ever-changing weather, but I don't know, this is one of those things where in the original game I actually house ruled these out. I dealt the random events as a timer, but I didn't actually follow the instructions on these. It'd be nice if these changed a little bit before the next Kickstarter filled, because like I say, it's just one of those little jabs that you get that's just one step too far. Because difficulty-wise, I mentioned that the original was hard. You know, you pretty much wanted to play it in story mode.
It will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
Here, it's still hard, but I do think they've worked on the difficulty rating a bit. I didn't feel like this one was like kicking my teeth in every 5 seconds. You have a lot of encounters, yes, but they felt beatable with your starting decks and with a couple of upgrades. It wasn't quite so punishing. Now, it's still not easy. I mean, if you've got 2 characters, you know, you basically pull your resources together, which can be quite handy. You have a lot more action points to spend in a turn, but what you'll pretty much have is like one character who's good at combat, one character who's good at diplomacy, and so when you get into the respective encounters, one character is going to be lagging behind a bit while the other does a lot of the legwork. But it's certainly easier than playing solo. Now, with solo mode, there is a secret card in the deck called Self-Reliant. It wasn't in the original game, but what it essentially does, it gives you an extra action point around, and it means you draw an extra card in combat or diplomacy and have one more hand size. I'm not convinced that that's enough to make solo mode easy, or not, like solo mode doable. I mean, for example, yeah, you would encounter slightly less punishing creatures for being on your own, but eventually you are going to fight the bad stuff. But with these characters, if I've got 2 of them together, I've got 6-7 action points between them, like 14 action points. If you go by yourself, you've got about 7 or 8. That's a lot less stuff you get to do in a turn, and at most you might get 1 extra random event on the top of the deck. That's it. It's not balanced enough, in my opinion, to go into this true solo.
Just give us a chance, you son of a.
But to be honest, it's not that difficult to pilot 2 characters. It just means that your combat and diplomacy encounters are a little bit longer because you've got obviously 2 hand sizes to kind of micromanage and discuss between the, well, if there's 2 of you, you're discussing it. If it's just by yourself, you're kind of working out what's the best way to use the cards together to beat the adversary. So I'm hoping that they tweak that a little bit, but story mode has clearly gone through some revisions. I mean, this is just a prototype rulebook, so it's all paper and that, and the rules are easy enough. I found the rulebook very easy to understand, but previously story mode was pretty much like 1 adjustment. Here though, you've got more starting items. You get a random standing item. There is apparently a secret card that wasn't in the demo set that makes the encounters less difficult. I want to know what that card is, please, because that could be like the quintessential reason why I play story mode. You then prepare the setup of the encounter deck so there was 1 less character. You place 1 more random event on top of the deck. That's pretty handy. Waystones actually cost less to put up. That's really cool. And you get to advance slightly easier and stuff. So there's a lot more adjustments for story mode. And honestly, I just think play story mode. Story mode is still fun. It's not like you'll cakewalk over everything. It's still going to beat you down if you're not careful. And it's not like you can just waltz through any encounter you find. It's still going to be, you know, reasonably hard. But I think story mode is just a bit more enjoyable because at the end of the day, my favorite aspect of the whole game is this. And this is still top-notch quality writing material. So why not let me enjoy this aspect a bit more? But you can decide what you want to do. If you want to play this in hardcore mode, which is also in the book, then seriously, what kind of masochist are you? But, you know, fair enough. That's exactly what you want to do. Now, one of the biggest issues I had with the original was the emphasis on combat. You have combat and diplomacy, so you can go up against, lots of different ideas, but there was more combat than diplomacy by a long shot.
We're sending somebody in to negotiate!
If you tried to make a diplomacy-focused character in the original Tainted Grail without any combat backup, you were going to get absolutely roasted by the game. It really does not give you enough reasons to go diplomatic as a character. If you go full combat, then fantastic. You're gonna be able to get through a chunk of the game. Yes, you might do bad at a few little diplomacy encounters, but they never really debilitated you that much, even if you failed them. So it's like, what the hell, really? Here, I'm hoping that they balance the aspects a bit more, and they're on the right track, not quite there yet, because there was definitely more diplomatic encounters in here, but more importantly, for key parts of the story, there were alternatives. So you could fight something, but if you went a slightly different route, or even on the same actual bit, depending what you did, you could choose to fight it or do the diplomatic option. Perfect. More of that, please. I want the choice. Make it thematic, make it reasonable as to why I would do either or, but if I've got a diplomacy-focused character and I think, you know what, I'm going to be better off dealing with this guy by diplomacy, I don't want to be screwed because I'm told I have to fight him and there's no other way. More of that, please. But there is still more combat in the game generally, at least from these two scenarios I found. I had to kill a bunch of stuff for food, there was a bunch of guardians obviously I had to kill, occasionally I have to fight a diplomacy encounter, but there was still more combat, and I felt like, given that you now have the choice of doing combat and diplomacy in some aspects, if you focus on combat, chances are you are still going to do better than if you focus on diplomacy. But if you're playing two-handed, you can have one combat person and one diplomacy person and kind of balance the two out. But yeah, I just want to see just that little bit of an extra push on the diplomacy factor. It's not, you still have fun with the card system going through combat or diplomacy. It's fun either way, but maybe just a little bit more emphasis or just a little bit more balance. But of course, this was from two scenarios. It might have tweaked quite a bit. Now, this next bit that's new is a little spoiler, but as again, if you're watching this video, you're getting a little spoiler. Not necessarily in plot. I'm not going to say where it ends up, but you're probably thinking, where on earth do you fight this big dude? Well, at some point in the scenarios, you come across a boss, basically. The idea, you come across one of them as the boss, the Kings of Ruin, and the idea is that it gives you the option to fight it or be diplomatic, as I mentioned before, which is really cool, but they work slightly differently in that it's a huge model. Depending where you fight, it will have implications, but when you do decide to fight or be diplomatic with it, certain events can happen during the encounter, which means that the adversary has its own collection of, mini collection of combat cards that go into your sequence that you're building during the round, and they'll have effects where it hits you back or, messes you up in some way. These feel very epic. I mean, they take quite a while to get through these encounters. These are you could spend half your session trying to get through one of these boss encounters. Well, it depends how long your session is. I suppose that's relative, but they're not short by any means. And they're certainly not easy. I mean, whoo-wee, if you're not prepared for these, it's gonna hurt. But I like the idea that it does make the boss feel a little bit different. It's not just another adversary who's rock solid, and you don't necessarily have to take down all its life. You might be able to just get up to a point, and then a story aspect, changes things for you. So I just thought that was a really good, refreshing change. And given that the whole idea is that you have 3 of these things running around, the 3 Kings of Ruin, I'm interested to see what they're going to do with the other 2. I mean, this was just the first encounter with this one. Okay, and okay, spoiler alert, you don't kill it on your first outing. That's kind of expected, really. But I get to fight this thing again, but then I've also got the 2 other kings, and they're very different in feel. I mean, this is clearly some warrior thing, but there's a priest, and I forget what the other one was, a magic user. But, 3 of those, different boss encounters, different stages, stage 1, stage 2 and that. They're going to be pretty fun, and I'm excited to see what they'll be, even if they might kick my ass.
Big monster!
So that's a pretty lengthy overview of all the stuff I remember from the 2 scenarios I've played, but, final thoughts are very positive. I mean, I already like Tainted Grail. I've already made that clear, okay? So it's not like I was going to jump into this and go, I hate it. But I hate it, my precious. But what I'm seeing here is an evolution of the original system. It's taking Tainted Grail, ironing out some of those issues and giving me a new and improved version. And I'll be interested to see what the 2.0 upgrade pack does for the original set, because maybe it'll make me go back and play the other Tainted Grail campaigns again. I mean, there's plenty of story here, there's different characters for me to play and different arcs to go down, so it won't be the same as when I played it before. By the time I get around to playing them, I'll have forgotten half the plot anyway because of memory. But if it's got the quality of life improvements that this set has, that's going to make the experience a lot better, and I'll be curious to see what they do with that. But, you know, with this, if you're just talking this standalone, you don't necessarily need to get it Sundrop. I mean, yes, these models look fantastic in Sundrop, I'm not going to deny it, but it's an extra cost, and even though Awakened Realms do a pretty good job of pricing their Kickstarters quite well, actually, to be honest, I mean, the upcoming prices I've seen on the preview page are pretty good value, I must say, it's still quite an expensive, like, prospect for a game in general, and of course adding Sundrop does add even more cost. But you're going to get 4 characters, a bunch of cards all over the place. I mean, this is just a token amount in the prototype. There's going to be a lot more cards, a lot more tokens, a lot more figures and miniatures and stuff, and it's just going to be a big, grandiose narrative game. But I'm really excited to see how this goes, because if they can iron out a few of those little wrinkles I mentioned already that still haven't quite been solved yet, but then keep all the rest and evolve the rest of the system, then I basically have another campaign that's going to be more fun to play than it was before, and it's just going to be the same great system that I know I enjoyed. So is it a complete revolutionary new game? No. It's more of the same, but with improvements. But that's not a bad thing, because the original was already great. This is hopefully going to be greater. So that's it for me. If you like what you see, please remember you can thumb up the video, you can subscribe to the channel or the Patreon to help me out with review copies, as I'm a small creator, but also mainly just get your comments down below. What do you think of the original Tainted Grail? Does this one sound good? Do the quality of life improvements take your fancy? Are you going to jump straight into this one and ignore the first one? What's your experiences? What's your outlook? Let me know. I'd be interested to hear. So until next time, you can check out more content on the show, including my top 100, which, yes, has halted a little bit because I've had a lot of content to do, but don't worry, I'll be getting back to it. But you can also check out other previews for other Kickstarter projects I've been doing recently. I'm Luke Hector, you've been watching The Broken Beeple, and remember, regardless of whether you want to make candles or go hunt deer, it's still only a game. Bye for now.